Now to that other Premier who really should resign. I mean, no argument on this front. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews and his government, they've made truly catastrophic mistakes, lethal mistakes, mistakes that have actually caused the deaths of 792 people now because they let the virus get out of their appallingly managed quarantine hotels. They were too slack in controlling it and keeping it out of nursing homes. And by the way, because they were too slack, they wrecked the state with bans instead because they knew they were totally incompetent about actually managing the virus outbreak properly. But today the Chief Health Officer came up with an excuse, or I don't know, maybe it's a part explanation for why Victoria had a harder struggle with this virus than other states. And the reason he gave was multiculturalism, except of course he didn't quite put it that bluntly as a Victorian bureaucrat after all.
On average, the household sizes that we're following up are twice to 3 times that size. That means more workplaces exposed, and it goes on exponentially. Those workplaces have people working there who have households that are 2 or 3 times the size of an average Victorian household. We are not building up from a trickle of a small number of cases in small households without some of the challenges of casualised work, of cash in hand, of issues of visa status, issues of language and cultural barriers. And so the challenge in Victoria is profoundly different from equivalent case numbers in any other jurisdiction of Australia.
Okay, so Victoria's got a profounder problem with households that are bigger than average, that have visa problems, that have language barriers and cultural barriers. Now, I've said for months that multiculturalism has made Victoria particularly vulnerable to this virus, and it has particularly affected new migrant communities and industries and schools, etc., where there are heavy migrant concentrations, and it still is affecting particularly multicultural suburbs. You just heard it, but would you believe it? When I wrote this, people asked the Press Council to punish me for saying what the Chief Health Officer himself has admitted is a problem. And I'm just going to wait to see if they're going to punish me for telling the truth. Now, I bet you this debate will, like so many such debates about immigration, be swept under the carpet when our governments go back to ramping up massive levels of immigration to give the economy a sugar hit. 200,000 a year they're looking at in a couple of years' time. Joining me are Jenna Clark, Assistant Editor of the West Australian, and Liz Storrar, Head of Advance Australia, a conservative political lobby group. Liz Storrar, the Chief Health Officer's excuse that getting on top of the virus outbreak in Victoria is made harder by language and cultural problems as well as visa problems, whatever that means. What should we learn from that?
Oh, look, there's a lot to be learnt from that. You must be feeling quite vindicated at this point, Andrew. Look, this isn't unique to Australia. We've currently got Orthodox Jews in the state of New York suing the state to lift pandemic restrictions. And here in Australia, not just in Victoria, we have seen special allowances being made even at the height of lockdown for certain religious minorities, cultural minorities who continued to meet in large numbers, even weddings of particular cultural minorities that were just turned a blind eye to, even as we saw, as is the same with the Orthodox Jews in New York, numbers rising. So it's quite across the board that we see here certain cultural communities refusing to abide by the laws of the land, rising numbers. But I think the greater cultural divide that's forming over this in Australia is between those Aussies, regardless of skin colour, regardless of cultural background, who still see this thing as a bowler and are willing to follow dictators like Dan Andrews and be fearful of it, and those of us in Australia who just want to get back to business, dig our economy out of the smouldering crater that it's become and get back to normal.
That last point is an excellent point. Jenna Clark, the Victorian government said it's translated health warnings into 33 different languages. It still wasn't enough. Had to send police around to doors to reinforce the message. And yet when the government, the Morrison government, said a couple of weeks ago, hey, listen, we'll step up family reunion because the immigration's created, but we will make sure there's some sort of attempt for these people to speak English before we give them a permanent visa, he got accused of being racist. Is that the kind of debate we actually now need to have without people screaming racist?
I think we're going to have to, Andrew, because population is the only thing that is going to save us and save our economy. So there were new stats out today that by this time last year we had 50,000 foreign students coming in to keep our private sector, private universities afloat, and this year we only had 500, or somewhere between 50 and 500. And those institutions are on their knees for a variety of reasons, but mainly because they don't have access to students anymore. So I think we all have to calm down, and that's everyone across the board, and have these really honest conversations about what we want Australia to look like post-COVID. And that involves a conversation around everything from immigration to our own Australians having more babies and how we're going to care for them moving forward.
But back to Gladys Berejiklian, I can't leave this subject because obviously you're both successful and professional women. What do you, Liz, make of the excuses that are being made for the New South Wales Premier that she was just a good woman let down by a bad man, unlucky in love, and, obviously we should all forgive her?
Look, it's a compelling story and one that really strikes such a human chord with so many, which is incredibly, incredibly effective. It's proving amazingly effective, even on people like myself who, is on a normal day happy to make, the Gestapo look like social workers when it comes to prosecuting the case for integrity in our elected representatives. But this case, look, first of all, there is no excuse for what she did. It doesn't pass the pub test. It isn't what's expected and wanted in our elected representatives. But this human case is proving so powerful. I've heard from people over the last 2 days who, prior to the last 2 days, I didn't even think would know the name of their premier because they're not politically minded or interested. And yet the outpouring of poor Gladys, this is unfair, she's just been stewed up and spat out by this horrible guy. She wasn't to know. We all do stupid things when we're in love. What she's really got going for her is her track record. After almost 2 decades in that place, she does have a stellar record. And so people are forgiving in this instance. They're willing to overlook it.
No, look, I'd cut her some slack on her record, but the woman angle, I don't know. Jenna, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I've been flip-flopping on this like Anthony Albanese's been flip-flopping on policy for the past couple of years. And the fact that it's just really hard. On one hand, you experience Ms Berejiklian, and she's such an accomplished professional politician, and she's done so well guiding New South Wales through the bushfires and also through COVID. I mean, it's been considered the gold standard of the way that we've come out of this global pandemic over there. But then on the other hand, you go, really, Gladys, really? You really let your guard down in your personal life, and that's where you've come undone. But I think Peter Credlin summed it up really well, and she said, look, if half of us got in trouble for the people that we were shagging, we'd all be unemployed. So maybe we need to cut her some slack, but I think I'm going to keep my powder dry and where Ms Berejiklian should go next, whether she should resign or not, when her partner in crime no longer takes the witness stand tomorrow for the next couple of days, and see what comes out from there.
That is a big caveat indeed. Absolutely correct. Although I have to say, I wonder whether we would be making the same excuses if the sexes were reversed in this story. But anyway,